Hello, sweet peas and sugar dumplings, and welcome to another Storytime with Shiningnathan. Today we're kicking off spooky season with another spooky tale from H.P. Lovecraft, and it is The Beast in the Cave. Now, before we begin this story, a little story time about my life and an apology of why I haven't posted in the last couple weeks. And that's because I was recuperating. You see, I had a little accident while I was riding a scooter and I got clipped by a car and had a date with the cobblestones. And so I busted my hip, knee, elbow, and most importantly, my ribs, which took the longest to heal. And so doing long form content, I wasn't able to. I spent 2.5 weeks resting, barely doing anything, and definitely no long form content. So I apologize for that. And now that my rib is much better, I can make this content for you. Now, if you followed me here from TikTok, I'm glad you're here. And if you found me organically, welcome. I'm also glad you're here too. Now, we pause right here to go get yourself a snack, something sweet, a drink, or whatever you want, or you can just sit me down while you listen to this tale, because it's about to be a little spooky one. Now, before we begin, put in the comments where you're listening to this from. And let's get into the story of The Beast in the Cave by H.P. Lovecraft. The horrible conclusion, which had been gradually intruding itself upon my confused and reluctant mind, was now an awful certainty. I was lost. Completely, hopelessly lost in the vast and labyrinthine recess of the Mammoth Cave. Turn as I might, in no direction could my straining vision seize on any object capable of serving as a guidepost to set me on the outward path. That never more should I behold the blessed light of day or scan the pleasant bills and dales of the beautiful world outside. My reason could no longer detain the slightest unbelief. Hope had departed. Yet, indoctrinated as I was by a life of philosophical study, I derived no small measure of satisfaction from my unimpassioned demeanor. For although I had frequently read of the wild frenzies into which were thrown the victims of similar situations, I experienced none of these, but stood quiet as soon as I clearly realized the loss of my bearings. Nor did the thought that I had probably wandered beyond the outmost limits of any ordinary search cause me to abandon my composure even for a moment. If I must die, I reflected, then was this terrible yet majestic cavern as welcome a sepulchre as that which any churchyard might afford, a conception which carried with it more of tranquillity than of despair. Starving would prove my ultimate fate. Of this I was certain. Some I knew had gone mad under circumstances such as these, but I felt that this end would not be mine. My disaster was the result of no fault save my own, since unknown to the guide I had separated myself from the regular party of sightseers and tourists and wandered for over an hour in forbidden avenues of the cave, and had found myself unable to retrace the devious windings which I had pursued since forsaking my companions. Already my torch had begun to expire. Soon I would be enveloped by the total and almost palpable blackness of the bowels of the earth. As I stood in the waning and unsteady light, I idly wondered over the exact circumstances of my coming end. I remembered the accounts which I had heard of the colony of consumptive, sick people who, taken their residence in this gigantic grotto to find health from the apparently salubrious air of the underground world with its steady, uniform temperature, pure air, and peaceful quiet, had found instead death in strange and ghastly form. I had seen the sad remains of their ill-made cottages as I passed them by with the party, and had wondered what unnatural influence a long sojourn in this immense and silent cavern would exert upon one as healthy and vigorous as I. Now, I grimly told myself my opportunity for settling this point had arrived, provided the want of food should not bring me to steady a departure from this life. As the last fitful rays of my torch faded into obscurity, I resolved to leave no stone unturned. no possible means of his escape neglected. So, summoning all the powers possessed by my lungs, I set up a series of loud shoutings in the vain hope of attracting the attention of the guide by my clamor. Yet as I called, I believed in my heart that my cries were to no purpose, and that my voice, magnified and reflected by the countless, numberless ramparts of the black maze about me, fell upon no ears save my own. All at once, however, my attention was fixed with a start as I fancied that I heard the sound of soft approaching steps on the rocky floor of the cavern. Was my deliverance about to be accomplished so soon? Had then all the horrible apprehensions been for naught? And was the guide, having marked my unwarranted absence from the party, followed my course, seeking me out in this limestone labyrinth? While these joyful queries arose in my mind, I was on the point of renewing my cries in order that my discovery might come sooner, when, in an instant, my delight was turned to horror as I listened. For my ever-acute ear, now sharpened in even greater degree by the complete silence of the cave, bore to my benumbed understanding the unexpected and dreadful knowledge that these footfalls were not like those of any mortal man. In the unearthly stillness of the subterranean region, the tread of the booted guide would have sounded like a series of sharp and incisive blows. These impacts were soft and steady, as of the paws of some feline. Besides, when I listened carefully, I seemed to trace the falls of 4 instead of 2 feet. I was now convinced that I had, by my own cries, aroused and attracted some wild beast, perhaps some mountain lion which had accidentally strayed within the cave. Perhaps, I considered, the Almighty had chosen for me a swifter and more merciful death than that of hunger. Yet the instinct for self-preservation, never wholly dormant, was stirred in my breast, and though escape from the uncommon peril might but spare me for a more sterner and more lingering end, I determined nonetheless to part with my life as high of a price as I could command. Strange as it may seem, my mind conceived of no intent on the part of the visitor save for that of hostility. Accordingly, I became very quiet, in the hope that the unknown beast would, in the absence of a guiding sound, lose its direction as I had, and thus pass me by. But this hope was not destined for realization, for the strange footfall steadily advanced. The animal had evidently obtained my scent, which, in an atmosphere so absolutely free from all distracting influences as is this cave, could doubtlessly be followed at long and great distance. Seeing, therefore, that I must be armed for defense against an uncanny and unseen attack in the dark, I groped about, made for the largest of fragments of the rock which were strewn upon all parts of the floor of the cavern in the vicinity, and I grasped one in each hand for immediate use, awaiting with resignation the inevitable result. Meanwhile, the hideous pattern of the paws drew near. Certainly, the conduct of the creature was exceedingly strange. Most of the time the tread seemed to be that of a quadruped, walking with a singular lack of unison betwixt hind and forefeet, yet at brief and infrequent intervals I fancied that but 2 feet were engaged in the process of locomotion and walking. I wondered what species of animal was to confront me. It must, I thought, be some unfortunate beast who had paid for its curiosity to investigate one of the entrances of the fearful cave, with a lifelong confinement in its interminable recesses. It doubtlessly obtained food from the eyeless fish and bats and rats of the cave, as well as some of the ordinary fish that were beset from the green river, as it communicated in an occult manner with the waters of the cave. I occupied my terrible vigil with grotesque conjectures of what alternation cave life might have wrought in the physical structure of the beast. Remembering the awful appearances ascribed by the local tradition to the consumptives who had died after long residence in the cave, Then I remembered with a start that even should I succeed in felling my antagonist, I should never behold its form, as my torch had long since been extinct, and I was entirely unprovided with matches. Oh, the tension on my brain now became frightful. My disordered fancy conjured up hideous and fearful shapes from the sinister darkness that surrounded me, and that actually seemed to press upon my body. Nearer and nearer the dreadful footfalls approached. It seemed that I must give vent to a piercing scream, yet I had been sufficiently irresolute to attempt such a thing. My voice could scarce have responded. I was petrified, rooted to the spot. I doubted if my right arm could allow me to hurl its rock missile at the oncoming thing when the crucial moment should arrive. Now the steady pat, pat of the steps was close at hand. Now very close. I could hear the labored breathing of the animal, and terror-struck as I was, I realized that it must have come from a considerable distance and was correspondingly fatigued. Suddenly the spell was broke. My right hand, guided by my ever-trustworthy sense of hearing, threw with full force the sharp-angled bit of limestone which it contained, forward that point in the darkness from which, entangled the breath and pattering, and wonderful to relate, I nearly reached its goal, for I heard the thing jump, landing at a distance away where it seemed to pause. Having now adjusted my aim, I discharged my second missile, this time most effectively, for which, full of joy, I listened as the creature fell with a sound and like a complete collapse, and evidently remained prone and unmoving. Oh, almost overpowered by the great relief which rushed over me, I reeled back against the wall. Breathing continued in heavy, gasping inhalation and expirations. Whence I realized that I had no more than wounded the creature. I now, all desire to examine the thing ceased. At last, something to groundless superstitious fear had entered my brain, and I did not approach the body, nor did I continue to cast stones at it in order to complete its extinction, its life. Instead, I ran at full speed in what, as nearly as I could estimate in my frenzied condition, the direction from which I had come. Run, run, run. Suddenly I heard a sound, rather a regular succession of sounds. In another instant they had resolved themselves into a sharp series of metallic clicks. Oh, this time there was no doubt it was my guide. As joy I beheld it was my guide, and then I shouted, yelled, screamed, even shrieked with joy as I beheld the vaulted arches above the faint and glimmering gulfings which I knew to be the reflecting light of an approaching torch. I ran to meet the flare, and before I could completely understand what had occurred, I was lying upon the ground at the feet of the guide, embracing his boots and gibbering. Oh, despite my boasted reserve, in the most meaningless and idiotic manner, pouring out my terrible story, and at the same time overwhelming my auditor with protestations of gratitude. At length, I awoke to something like my normal consciousness. The guide had noted my absence upon the arrival of the party at the entrance of the cave, and from his own intuitive sense of direction proceeded to make a thorough canvassing of the by-passages just ahead of where he had last spoken to me, and located my whereabouts after a quest of about 4 hours. By the time he had related this to me, I, emboldened by his torch and his company, began to reflect upon the strange beast which I had wounded but a short distance back in the cave, and suggested that we ascertain, by the flashlight's aid, what manner of creatures was my victim. Accordingly, I retraced my steps, this time with the courage born of companionship, to the scene of my terrible experience. Soon, we descried a white object on the floor, an object even whiter than the gleaming limestone itself. Cautiously, very cautiously advancing, we gave vent to a simultaneous explosion of wonderment, for of all the unnatural monsters either of us had in our lifetimes beheld, this was surpassed in degree the strangest. It appeared to be an anthropoid ape of large proportions, escaped from perhaps some strange menagerie. Its hair was snow white, a thing no doubt due to the bleaching action of the long existence with the inky confines of the cave, but it was also surprisingly thin, being indeed largely absent save on the head. Oh, there was of such length and abundance that it fell over the soldiers in considerable fusion that hair. The face was turned away from us as the creature lay almost directly upon it. The inclination of the limbs was very singular, explaining, however, the alternation in which their use, which I had before noted, whereby the beast would sometimes be on all fours and other occasions by two for its progress of locomotion. From the tips of the fingers or toes, long rat-like claws extended. The hands or feet were not prehensile, a fact that I ascribed to the long residence in the cave, which, as I before mentioned, seemed evident from the all-pervading, almost unearthly whiteness so characteristic of the whole anatomy. No tail seemed to be present. The respiration, its breathing, had now grown very feeble, and the guide had drawn his pistol with the evident intent of dispatching the creature, when a sudden sound emitted by the latter caused the weapon to fall unused. The sound was of unnatural it was of a nature difficult to describe. It was not that normal note of any known species of simian, and I wonder if this unnatural quality were not the result of long and complete continued silence, broken by the sensations produced by the advent of the light. A thing which this beast could not have seen since it first entered the cave. The sound which it might feebly attempt to classify as a kind of deep tone, chattering, faintly continued. All at once, a fleeting spasm of energy seemed to pass through the frame of the beast. The paws went through convulsive motion after motion, and the limbs contracted. With a jerk, the whole body rolled over to its face. Its face turned in our direction. For a moment, I was so struck with horror at the eyes. Those revealed that I noted nothing else. They were black, those eyes, deep, jetted black in hideous contrast to the snow-white hair and flesh, like those of other cave denizens. They were deeply sunken in their orbits and were entirely destitute of an iris. As I looked more closely, I saw that they were set in a face with a profusion jaw that of an average ape, and infinitely less hairy. The nose was quite distinct as we gazed upon the uncanny sight presented to our vision. The thick lips opened and several sounds issued from them, after which the thing relaxed into death. The guide clutched my coat sleeve and trembled so violently that the light shook fitfully, casting weird moving shadows on the wall. I made no motion, but stood rigidly still, my horrified eyes fixed upon the floor ahead. The fear left, and wonder, awe, compassion, and reverence succeeded in its place, for the sounds uttered by the stricken figure that lay stretched out on the limestone had told us the horrifying truth. The creature I had killed, the strange beast of the unfathomed cave, was, or had one time been, a man. I hope you enjoyed this telling of The Beast in the Cave by H.P. Lovecraft. I'm going to have much more stuff coming out for this spooky season, so stick ahead. And remember to turn on all the things, the likes, the subscribes, the things, and all the bells and whistles, honey. I'm so happy to be able to make this for you and do this type of content for you. And here on this channel, more things will be coming, such as my travels here, exploring Lisboa and Portugal and beyond, and tons of other stuff. And special thank you to my patrons who make this possible, who give me the opportunity to bring you joy, comfort, a little rest in these hard times. Without my patrons, I wouldn't be able to pay my rent, buy my food, and feed my cat. So thank you, my loves, those of you watching. And if you'd like to support my content, please consider going to patreon.com/Shiningnathan to become a patron for as low as $3 a month. Lord knows I do need more of y'all. Now, as always, I love you, take care, and don't go wandering around in caves. Until next time.